Welcome back to the Deep Dive. If you are listening to this right now, you are likely someone deeply interested in men's rights activism, the red-pilled manosphere, and really understanding the profound historical shift in our modern institutions.
Yeah, specifically, you want to understand the history and structure of those institutions before they were, as our source material today forcefully argues captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
Right. We know you're here because you want the unvarnished, detailed breakdown of the most hard-hitting, vital source material out there. So right off the bat, I need to ask you to like and subscribe to the Deep Dive. It ensures you never miss a thorough exploration like the one we're about to embark on today.
Exactly. And today's exploration, it really requires us to look at some highly complex, deeply layered arguments. I mean, we are looking at a system of thought that attempts to completely deconstruct the modern social contract.
Our mission today is to unpack this really comprehensive ebook that has been making massive waves across decentralized networks and private forums. It's titled Redpilled Serenity Prayer. Stoic men are not responsible for women's emotional terrorism.
Written by Conrad Riker.
Right, by Conrad Riker. And this book is essentially being framed as an absolute must-read survival manual for the modern man. It's a dense, highly tactical playbook.
It really is.
And before we get any further, I highly urge you to check it out on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to secure your own copy, because the sheer volume of material Riker covers is it's staggering.
Yeah.
But before we get into the mechanics of his strategies for stoic detachment, financial fortification, all of that, we absolutely must establish the ground rules for today's discussion.
We do. As we dive into this material, I want to make an explicit, strict impartiality disclaimer directly to you, the listener. The source material we are examining today, it contains highly politically charged right-wing and manosphere-specific content regarding gender dynamics, biology, and institutional capture.
Very charged.
Extremely. And it is absolutely critical to understand that we, as your hosts, we are not taking sides. We are not endorsing these viewpoints, nor are we condemning them.
Right. Our sole mission here is to impartially report on the content provided in the text. We're here to accurately convey the author's ideas, unpack the data and historical context he cites, and really help you understand the precise mechanics of this specific worldview.
Exactly. We're looking at the architecture of his argument, so keeping that strict neutrality in mind, let's unpack the core premise that sets the stage for Riker's entire book.
He argues that Western institutions, from the family court systems and corporate HR departments all the way to mainstream media and academia, have been fundamentally captured. He claims they've been systematically turned against men by design.
And the goal of this deep dive is to look at how he defines this capture and, more importantly, the extreme, specific countermeasures he prescribes for men to survive it.
Right, because Riker grounds his entire philosophy in a contrast between what he calls biological realism and institutional capture. He brings up this concept of an authority vacuum. What exactly is the mechanism behind that?
Well, the core insight here isn't just a grievance about modern roles. It's about Riker's belief that modern society has created an unsustainable paradox for men. He argues that society continues to relentlessly demand traditional male sacrifice.
Like providing and protecting.
Exactly. We see this in the expectation that men will still be the primary providers, the physical protectors, and the ones executing the most dangerous, life-threatening labor.
But his point is that the reward is gone.
Right. He claims that while the expectation of sacrifice remains, the traditional authority, respect, and deference that historically accompanied those roles have been systematically erased. He calls this the authority vacuum. It's a societal structure where male responsibility is legally and socially enforced, but male authority is demonized.
He uses this incredibly evocative phrase, Sisyphus gynocracy. He's comparing the modern man to Sisyphus from Greek mythology, endlessly pushing a boulder up a hill. But in Riker's view, men are pushing this boulder to fund and uphold female-centric policies that, ironically, actively work against male interests.
And to justify this claim, he doesn't just rely on philosophy. He leans heavily into evolutionary psychology. The book cites Dr. David Buss quite extensively.
Yeah, the evolutionary psychology aspect is really foundational to his argument here. Dr. David Buss is an evolutionary psychologist widely known for his comprehensive study on human mating strategies across 37 different cultures.
According to the data presented in Riker's text, Buss's research demonstrates that women are biologically, evolutionarily wired for hypergamy.
Let's break that term down for a second because it comes up constantly in this space. What does hypergamy actually mean in the context of this book?
In this context, hypergamy is defined as the deeply ingrained biological instinct to seek out mates who possess higher status, greater physical dominance, and more abundant resources than the female herself. Riker argues that this isn't a social construct. It's a survival mechanism hardwired into human DNA over hundreds of thousands of years.
Conversely, the book argues that men are evolutionarily wired to prioritize fertility markers, attributes like youth, physical symmetry, and health, because a man's biological imperative was to ensure the propagation of his lineage.
So Riker's underlying premise is that biology is completely indifferent to modern political correctness, diversity quotas, or equality pamphlets. He actually points to Sweden to illustrate this, which is an interesting choice given Sweden's reputation.
And it's the Swedish paradox.
Exactly. He notes that when the Swedish government implemented some of the most aggressive, well-funded, gender-neutral policies in the world, actively trying to engineer a society without gender roles, career choices actually became more stereotypically divided, not less.
Men still gravitated toward things and systems like engineering, while women gravitated toward people and caregiving.
Right. He uses this to highlight what he terms the paradox of equality. And to hammer this home, he brings up some incredibly stark workplace statistics.
The text is meticulously specific about this disparity. Riker pulls data from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, noting that men make up a staggering 93% of workplace fatalities.
93%.
Massive. He details how men are the ones dying in collapsed trenches, getting crushed on offshore oil rigs, and falling from commercial roofing projects. He specifically mentions a historical statistic from Roofers Union Local 12, which buried 37 of its members in a single year.
It's heavy statistic. Riker's argument here is that mainstream society completely ignores this massive scale of male sacrifice. He points out that the cultural conversation is obsessively focused on achieving 50-50 female representation in comfortable, climate-controlled corporate boardrooms.
But completely silent on the gender disparity in sewage work, trash collection, or high-voltage line repair.
Exactly. He asserts that institutions demand equal representation only in safe, lucrative environments, but are perfectly content maintaining a massive mortality gap in dangerous essential labor.
Which brings us to the philosophical core of the book, and its title, The Red Pill Serenity Prayer. Riker draws heavily on ancient Stoic philosophers, specifically Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, but he applies this ancient Stoicism to modern gender dynamics.
The traditional Serenity prayer is about accepting the things you cannot change and having the courage to change the things you can. Riker's Red Pill version advises men to completely and utterly stop trying to fix, manage, or control female emotions, or the biased systems he describes.
He uses an analogy that really sticks out. He says, trying to fix a partner's emotional chaos through logic or appeasement is like trying to extinguish a grease fire with a bucket of water.
It just explodes.
Right, it's not just futile, it's going to blow up in your face and cause exponentially more damage. Instead, the strategy he lays out involves what he calls radical self-ownership.
Radical self-ownership, according to the mechanics laid out in the book, means severing your internal emotional state from external validation. Riker states that a man should exclusively focus his energy on his own mind, his own physical body, and his own financial infrastructure.
If a partner has a highly volatile emotional meltdown, or if mainstream society slaps him with the label of toxic masculinity, Riker says a truly stoic man must recognize that those emotions are hers alone.
And society's labels are entirely irrelevant to his biological and personal imperative to build his own empire.
It's an intense level of psychological detachment. But what's fascinating is how he takes this abstract stoic philosophy and immediately weaponizes it for one of the most volatile, high-stakes arenas a modern man can face. He transitions from philosophy directly into the legal system.
Specifically what he explicitly refers to as kangaroo courts and the 9/11 gambit.
Right. He looks at the family court system and essentially likens it to a modern-day debtor's prison designed to extract male labor. The statistics he curates for this argument are meant to shock the reader.
They are very deliberate. The book cites data suggesting that in certain jurisdictions, he singles out Massachusetts. For example, mothers win up to 93% of contested custody battles.
And he emphasizes that this happens even when fathers present equal parenting claims, or even when the father can prove vastly superior income, housing stability, and psychological fitness.
Furthermore, he points to census data indicating that 97% of alimony payers are men.
97%.
Riker uses this data to build the perspective that modern marriage is no longer a spiritual union or a partnership, but rather a financial suicide note. In his view, it's a contract where the state essentially puts a gun to a man's head and labels the subsequent extraction of his resources as equality.
To give this data some visceral impact, he shares a series of harrowing case studies. There's the story of Mike, a Silicon Valley software engineer. According to the book, Mike is legally mandated to pay his ex-wife $15,000 a month in alimony and support while he watches via social media as she jets off to Bali and stays in luxury villas with her new boyfriend.
And then there's Robert Bates, a pub owner in London. Riker details how Bates lost his business, his home, and his reputation after a completely fabricated abuse claim.
The book describes Bates sleeping on the concrete floor of his brother's garage, while still being legally forced to transfer 1,200 pounds a month to the very woman who orchestrated his ruin.
Riker is trying to show the listener that the legal meat grinder isn't broken. He argues it is functioning exactly as designed to redistribute male wealth. And he says the entry point for this destruction is often what he calls the 911 gambit.
Let's unpack the 911 gambit and the history behind it, because Riker bases a large portion of his defensive strategy on understanding this specific legal mechanism. The 911 gambit, as described in the text, is the deliberate weaponization of police and the state against men during domestic disputes.
And he traces the origin of this dynamic back to the Duluth model.
I want to pause on the Duluth model, because that sounds like a massive systemic shift in jurisprudence. How does a framework developed in the 1980s dictate a modern police response?
Well, the Duluth model, developed in Duluth, Minnesota in the early 80s, fundamentally shifted how domestic violence was viewed by law enforcement and social workers. Prior to this, police often required physical evidence of an altercation.
Like actual injuries.
Right. But the Duluth model introduced a framework that posited domestic violence is primarily a patriarchal tool used by men to maintain power and control over women.
So it gendered the assumption.
Exactly. Riker argues that this model effectively trained generations of police officers and judges to automatically assume male guilt in any domestic call. According to the book's analysis of the model, a woman doesn't need physical bruises. She can simply claim she is in fear for her safety or allege invisible emotional abuse.
And the protocol dictates that the man must be arrested, removed from his property, and slapped with a restraining order, often before any formal investigation has taken place.
And once that restraining order is in place, he points out, the man immediately loses access to his home, his children, and his firearms, putting him at a massive tactical disadvantage in the subsequent divorce proceedings.
He backs up the dangers of this guilty until proven innocent environment with the story of Brian Banks, which is a truly chilling breakdown of the justice system.
The Brian Banks case is a cornerstone of his argument regarding false accusations. Banks was a highly recruited, rising high school football star with a full ride to USC and NFL prospects. He was accused of rape by a classmate.
Riker details how the system, operating under the presumption of guilt and the pressure to secure convictions in sexual assault cases, just steamrolled him.
Banks spent over 5 years in state prison and another 5 years on strict parole as a registered sex offender. His prime athletic years, his reputation, and his freedom were entirely stolen.
And the horrific twist, which Riker highlights, is that years later, the accuser secretly admitted on camera that she completely fabricated the entire event. She did it out of fear of her mother finding out she was sexually active, and later successfully sued the school district for $1.5 million based on that very same lie.
Riker connects the Banks tragedy directly to the Duke lacrosse scandal, another high-profile case where the media, university faculty, and the local prosecutor presumed total guilt of the male students before a single fact was verified.
Only for the entire narrative to completely collapse under scrutiny as a malicious fabrication.
To show this isn't just anecdotal, Riker cites the National Registry of Exonerations, pointing out that 15% of all wrongful convictions documented involve false sexual claims.
He also pulls in international data, citing UK Home Office statistics that suggest between 5 to 10% of rape allegations are provably, demonstrably fabricated.
Looking at the data and the historical context provided in the book, it raises a critical operational question for you, the listener. How does Riker suggest men actually survive in an environment where he claims the baseline assumption is male guilt?
This is where the book transitions from theory into a highly prescriptive, tactical defensive playbook. It's an incredibly systematic approach to personal defense. He starts with the psychological.
He mentions a technique called the gray rock method for dealing with emotional manipulation or attempts to provoke a reaction that could be used against a man in court.
What does that look like in practice?
The gray rock method is a psychological tool. Riker credits to researchers specializing in abusive dynamics, like Dr. Tara Palmatier. The concept is literal. When faced with emotional terrorism, gaslighting, or hysterical provocation, a man must force himself to become as uninteresting, unresponsive, and emotionally flat as a gray rock.
He gives a very specific example of a man named Mark. Mark's ex-partner attempted to manipulate him by sending photos of ketchup smeared on her wrists, threatening self-harm if he didn't comply with her demands.
The natural instinctual response would be panic, calling her, or rushing over, which, Riker points out, gives the manipulator exactly the power and attention they seek and could potentially walk the man into a physical trap.
Instead, Mark used the gray rock method. He didn't show anger, he didn't show fear, he simply texted back, "Please seek professional help," and completely disengaged.
Exactly. The text claims that according to behavioral psychology, 89% of manipulative, attention-seeking behaviors will experience a brief extinction burst.
Meaning they escalate for a short period.
Right, but they will eventually extinguish entirely when they are completely deprived of the oxygen of an emotional reaction. Riker advises men that silence and utter boredom are the most impenetrable shields against a chaotic partner.
It's all about starving the drama of oxygen. But he knows psychology isn't enough when the police get involved, so he pushes for aggressive, systematic legal documentation. He insists that men must utilize single-party consent recording wherever it is legally permitted.
He essentially tells the reader to turn their smartphone into a digital Kevlar vest, recording every single interaction, drop-off, and argument to create an indisputable objective reality.
He is also very specific about how to manage co-parenting communication. He strongly recommends never communicating with a hostile ex via regular text message or phone calls.
Instead, he mandates the use of court-approved, time-stamped applications like Custody Exchange or our Family Wizard.
He explains the math behind this. If an ex is consistently 15 minutes late for custody handovers 87 times over a year, the app provides a permanent, undeniable digital ledger of that behavior.
A man can then take that irrefutable data to a judge to prove parental alienation or contempt, potentially winning back hundreds of hours of lost parenting time.
And then we get to perhaps the most controversial countermeasure in this section of the book. His absolute insistence on demanding DNA tests at birth. He addresses paternity fraud head-on.
Yes, Riker treats paternity fraud not just as a betrayal, but as a form of lifelong financial slavery. He cites studies aggregated from international DNA testing clinics, suggesting that up to 30% of tested fathers in certain demographics discover they are not biologically related to the children they have been raising and financially supporting.
He illustrates the brutal legal reality of this with the story of Jamal in Detroit. Jamal was raising twins. Through a random blood type discrepancy during a hospital visit, he discovered that one of the twins was not biologically his.
You would think that ends his financial obligation to the child that isn't his, right?
Logically, yes, but legally, Riker explains, the system operates differently. He points out that under Michigan's best interests of the child legal standard, which is common in many states because Jamal had acted as the father for several years, the court deemed it would be detrimental to the child's lifestyle to sever the financial support.
Therefore, Jamal was legally mandated to continue paying child support for another man's biological child until they reached adulthood.
Riker's countermeasure to prevent this nightmare scenario is militant. He advises men to keep a discreet home DNA testing kit in the trunk of their car and to swab the child immediately at the hospital after delivery.
He tells men to reframe the social awkwardness of this by internalizing the phrase, "Motherhood is a biological certainty. Fatherhood is a circumstantial assumption."
That legal exposure, the threat of having your entire life's labor redirected by a court order, is exactly why he pivots to the most extensive section of the book.
Because we've talked about how Riker suggests fortifying the mind and defending against legal traps, but he argues none of that matters if your resources are exposed.
That leads us directly into his blueprint for becoming what he calls judgment-proof. He refers to the modern institution of marriage as the marriage plantation.
That is a highly provocative, intentionally incendiary term he uses to describe how he views the systemic, legally enforced extraction of male wealth. To back up his claim that men are waking up to this reality, Riker points to recent Pew Research data showing that 63% of unmarried men under the age of 30 are now effectively on a marriage strike.
They are refusing to participate in the institution.
Riker argues these young men aren't just lazy or opting out of society as the media often portrays them. He claims they are making a highly rational, self-preserving financial calculation.
He brings in some heavy economic data to support that calculation. He cites Stanford economists who analyze the long-term financial devastation of divorce on men. The data shows that a divorced man's average net worth drops by a catastrophic 52% within the first 5 years of the marriage dissolving.
52%, that's devastating.
Riker jokes, though, he's entirely serious about the implications that getting married in the modern legal climate is essentially betting half of everything you will ever own that she won't quit liking you.
When you understand that 52% wealth destruction metric, you understand why Riker dedicates so much time to complex asset protection. He doesn't just tell men to save money, he teaches them how to build what he calls the one-hand 2070 wealth fortress.
This section of the book reads like a masterclass in offshore accounting and legal obfuscation. Let's treat the listener like they want the actual tactical details here, because this is dense. How does this one-hand 2070 framework actually function? Trace the path of this fortress for us.
The core insight here isn't just about saving money. It's about Riker's belief that in the modern legal system, visibility equals vulnerability. He's essentially teaching men to treat their personal finances like a geopolitical shell game.
But the strategy involves layering distinct legal entities across multiple jurisdictions.
Right, like a financial matryoshka doll. Riker suggests starting at the domestic level by setting up a limited liability company, an LLC, but specifically in a privacy-friendly state like Nevada or Wyoming.
Because these states don't require the ultimate beneficial owner's name to be on public corporate registries.
So on paper, John Doe doesn't own the asset, the Wyoming LLC owns it. But he doesn't stop there because a U.S. judge could still pierce that LLC. So the next layer is ensuring that the Wyoming LLC is entirely owned by an international business company, an IBC.
And where is this IBC located?
He advises establishing the IBC in a sovereign jurisdiction that actively ignores or rejects U.S. civil court orders and subpoenas, specifically mentioning nations like Panama or Belize.
He specifically references private offshore banking institutions like Kai International Bank in Belize.
So now, the assets are technically owned by a foreign corporation in a country that will not answer the phone when an American divorce lawyer calls.
But who owns the IBC?
That's the final impenetrable layer. The ultimate beneficiary holding the shares of the Belize IBC is a dynasty trust, typically established in highly specific domestic jurisdictions known for asset protection, like South Dakota or Delaware.
These trusts are designed to last for centuries, and crucially, they contain ironclad, non-modifiable spendthrift clauses.
Riker explains that when you put your wealth into the structure, you technically own nothing. You merely manage it. If an ex-wife's forensic accountant tries to subpoena your assets during a divorce, they hit a multi-jurisdictional brick wall.
He tells a story to illustrate just how powerful this is. He outlines the case of a tech entrepreneur who saw the writing on the wall and spent a year quietly shielding a $12 million portfolio using these exact methods.
18 months later, his fiancée, now his wife, filed for a contested divorce.
When her legal team attempted to seize his assets, the California family court judge physically couldn't touch a single dime of it because the wealth legally belonged to a trust in South Dakota, owned by a corporation in Belize.
The wife's lawyers burned through hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees trying to pierce the veil and eventually had to settle for a fraction of the estate. It's about building an endless, expensive maze for lawyers.
But Riker acknowledges that setting up a Belizean IBC isn't practical for a guy who is just starting to build his wealth. So he provides a daily, practical banking setup for the average man, which he calls the banking trifecta.
Right, this is the everyday operational security. The trifecta is designed to prevent financial bleeding from hidden fees, but more importantly, to protect against the sudden draining of joint accounts, a common tactic he warns about at the onset of a divorce.
First, there's the air gap account. What is the mechanism there?
The air gap account acts as a financial moat. This is a checking account that holds only the specific amount of cash you intend to spend on groceries, gas, and daily expenses for that specific week. It is never linked to your main reserves.
Riker explains that if a partner attempts to maliciously clean out a joint account, or if a rogue auto subscription tries to overcharge you, they hit concrete.
The account simply empties out at a couple $100s because the bulk of the funds are securely stored elsewhere.
Then there is the second layer, the auto-pay bunker. This is a completely separate checking account utilized solely for fixed automated bills, mortgage, utilities, insurance. You never carry a debit card for this account in your wallet.
It exists entirely in the background, preventing you from ever missing a crucial payment because a random gym charge drained your primary checking.
And finally, the third piece, the interest citadel.
The interest citadel is a high-yield savings account or money market fund situated at a completely different banking institution than the first two accounts. This is where the emergency fund and capital reserves actually grow.
Riker stresses the absolute necessity of automating this entire trifecta. The moment your paycheck hits, the money must immediately and automatically splinter into these three fortified accounts before you or anyone else can touch it or be tempted to spend it.
It's a highly disciplined approach to fiat currency, but where Riker's financial philosophy becomes remarkably militant is his stance on cryptocurrency. He doesn't just view crypto as an investment. He sees digital wealth as the ultimate, unseizable defense against institutional capture.
However, he's hypercritical of how most people use it. He warns men never to treat centralized exchanges like Coinbase or Binance as banks.
He points to the catastrophic collapse of FTX as a prime example. He notes that men who thought they were being sovereign and independent by holding crypto, but left their funds on Sam Bankman-Fried's exchange, got their wealth vaporized overnight when the institution failed.
Riker's rule is absolute. If you don't hold the private cryptographic keys, you don't own the money.
He refers to hardware wallets devices like a Trezor or a Ledger that look like little USB drives as a financial chastity belt.
You physically separate your seed phrase, the master password to your funds, from internet-enabled devices where it could be hacked or betrayed. But his level of paranoia, or perhaps extreme preparation, depending on your perspective, goes far beyond just owning a hardware wallet. He advocates for a 3 of 5 multi-sig vault for significant wealth.
Let's break that tech down using an analogy because it sounds incredibly complex.
Let's unpack a multi-sig or multi-signature setup.
Imagine a massive bank vault door, but instead of one keyhole, there are 5 separate keyholes. To open the door and move the money, the system mathematically requires at least 3 of those keys to be turned simultaneously.
A 3 of 5 multi-sig means you generate 5 independent cryptographic keys. Riker's specific deployment strategy is fascinating. He suggests burying one hardware key inside a fireproof gun safe, giving the second key to a highly trusted, long-term army buddy or mentor.
Securing a third in a safety deposit box in a different state, hiding the fourth in a secondary location, and memorizing the 5th key's seed phrase entirely in your head.
Wait, so if a guy is working a demanding corporate job, how does he actually implement this without locking himself out of his own money?
The beauty of the 3 of 5 system is redundancy. If your house burns down and you lose the key in the gun safe, you still have the other 4. If your trusted buddy turns on you, he only has 1 key. He can't move the funds himself because he needs 3.
And crucially, Riker claims this exact setup saved his own Ethereum stack from being frozen by a judge during his own divorce proceedings. Even if a court ordered him to hand over the funds, he could truthfully claim that he physically could not access them without the cooperation of third parties outside the court's jurisdiction.
He also champions specific privacy coins, particularly Monero. He points out a flaw in Bitcoin that most people don't realize. The Bitcoin blockchain is a completely public, transparent ledger.
If a highly motivated forensic divorce lawyer links your identity to your Bitcoin wallet address, they can trace every single transaction you've ever made.
Riker argues that Monero solves this by using ring signatures. Explain how a ring signature works for the listener.
Let's use a real-world analogy to understand a ring signature. Imagine you need to sign a physical check to authorize a payment. In the Bitcoin network, your unique, clear signature is on the check for everyone to see.
In the Monero network using ring signatures, it's as if the moment you sign the check, your signature is instantly and randomly mashed up with the signatures of 10 other complete strangers who are making transactions at the exact same time.
The network and the bank can mathematically verify that one of the people in that group of 11 had the funds and authorized the check, making the transaction valid. But it is mathematically impossible to prove which specific person in the ring actually signed it.
He likens using Monero to paying cash in a dark speakeasy. There is simply no paper trail.
And to completely insulate himself from the mainstream digital infrastructure, he tells his readers to stop relying on big tech servers like Amazon Web Services to process their transactions.
He provides a technical guide on how to run your own personal crypto node using a Raspberry Pi, a tiny $120 microcomputer routing all the traffic over the Tor network to mask the IP address.
He argues this gives a man total sovereign control over his economic energy, completely invisible to the state.
This relentless pursuit of sovereignty isn't limited to money. This transition from financial sovereignty to physical and mental sovereignty is the core theme as we move into the next major concept in the book.
Riker argues that building an impenetrable bank account is entirely useless if your biological hardware and psychological software are being systematically degraded by the modern environment.
That brings us to what he calls chemical warfare. Riker cites studies from the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology highlighting a deeply concerning trend. Male testosterone levels have plummeted by an estimated 60% since 1972.
The average 30-year-old man today has significantly less testosterone than his grandfather did at the same age. Riker refuses to accept this as an evolutionary accident. He refers to it as systemic chemical castration.
According to the author, modern men are essentially marinating in an invisible soup of endocrine disruptors. He points specifically to the ubiquity of plastics containing BPA, or bisphenol A.
More concerningly, he highlights that the industry's response, so-called BPA-free plastics, often rely on BPS, or bisphenol S, which he argues based on clinical data disrupts male hormones just as effectively as the chemical it replaced.
How exactly do these chemicals disrupt the hormones?
These chemicals are classified as xenoestrogens. When they enter the male body, their molecular structure is so similar to estrogen that they bind to the body's estrogen receptors, tricking the endocrine system into reacting as if the body is flooded with female hormones.
Riker cites a staggering UCLA study where male rats were fed water exclusively from standard commercial plastic bottles. Within 60 days, the xenoestrogens had caused their sperm counts to crash by 40%, alongside significant decreases in aggressive exploratory behaviors.
He also points to the prevalence of phytoestrogens in highly processed soy products, arguing that the standard modern diet is quite literally laced with estrogen mimics designed to make men docile.
So, if a man wants to reclaim his biological baseline, what does Riker prescribe?
He advocates for a total environmental and dietary overhaul. He pushes for a wild game or strict carnivore diet, insisting that men must cook exclusively on cast iron pans to boost iron intake and avoid the chemical coatings on non-stick Teflon pans.
He tells men to systematically purge their kitchens, completely abandoning plastic Tupperware and water bottles for glass containers and stainless steel. He claims in the book that by strictly adhering to this protocol, avoiding seed oils and plastics, he naturally raised his own testosterone levels by 29% in just 3 months.
But reclaiming the hormones is only step one. He says you have to forge the physical vessel. He pulls heavily from Commander Mark Devine's SEAL Fit protocols to build, he calls, an unbreakable framework.
The SEAL Fit framework integrated into Riker's book is a fascinating departure from mainstream fitness advice. Riker is highly critical of traditional hypertrophy bodybuilding, which he calls aesthetic vanity.
And he warns against the massive popularity of CrossFit. He notes that CrossFit carries a 78% annual injury rate, arguing that blowing out your shoulders for time in a gym makes you a liability, not an asset, in a real survival scenario.
Instead, he focuses entirely on structural durability and nervous system control. The first pillar of his physical training is tactical tissue adaptation.
This focuses heavily on the connective tissue rather than just muscle bellies.
Precisely. Tactical tissue adaptation heavily utilizes loaded eccentric movements. For example, he prescribes heavy Bulgarian split squats but mandates a grueling, slow 3 to 5 second descent phase under tension.
This specific time under tension protocol is designed to thicken and rebuild tendons and ligaments, turning them into steel cables that are highly resistant to tearing during explosive real-world movements.
The second pillar is breath armor integration. This is where the physical and the psychological start to merge. He teaches box breathing, a technique where you inhale deeply for 4 seconds, hold the breath in your lungs for 4 seconds, exhale completely over 4 seconds, and hold the empty lungs for 4 seconds.
Riker points out that Navy SEALs utilize this exact technique to calm their nervous systems while under mortar fire or right before breaching a compound.
He tells his readers they should be deploying this exact same breath work while sitting under the fluorescent lights of a high-stakes corporate HR meeting, or while sitting at the defendant's table during a grueling custody battle to keep their cortisol levels from spiking and their nervous system completely iced out and rational.
And the third physical pillar is neuroplastic joint priming. This concept is inspired by the training drills of Russian Spetsnaz special forces. It involves highly unconventional movements, such as crawling through complex outdoor obstacle courses while blindfolded.
Why blindfolded?
By removing visual input, the brain is forced to hyper-rely on proprioception, the body's awareness of itself in space. Riker argues this trains the central nervous system to autopilot perfect breakfalls, improves balance on uneven terrain, and mechanically thickens the cartilage in the joints.
It's a holistic, almost militant approach to making the physical body as impenetrable and judgment-proof as the offshore bank accounts he detailed earlier.
But Riker is clear that the body is only half the battle. Let's transition to what he calls the mind armory. How does a stoic man actively defeat the psychological warfare of gaslighting in real time?
Riker introduces a highly effective cognitive tool he calls the 3F filter. The 3F filter is a rapid response cognitive framework Riker designed for men to deploy instantly when faced with emotional demands, accusations, or manipulative framing from a partner, a coworker, or a family member.
When a man is confronted with a demand, he must mentally pause and ask himself 3 specific questions to evaluate the interaction. First, is it factual? Meaning, can the claim be proven with objective data and evidence, or is it based entirely on subjective feelings?
Second, is it fair? Meaning, is the standard being applied reciprocal, or is it a double standard designed to extract concessions only from him?
And third, is it functional? Meaning, does engaging with this demand serve a practical, constructive goal, or is it merely an exercise in creating chaos?
He gives a very stark example of how to apply this. He describes the scenario where an ex-partner is screaming, "You never loved me," specifically because the man logically refused to co-sign a $100,000 loan for her useless art school degree.
Riker tells the reader to run it through the filter. Is it factual? No, love is not defined by taking on crippling financial liability. Is it fair? No, she wouldn't co-sign a massive loan for him. Is it functional? No, arguing about the definition of love while discussing banking risk is pointless.
Because the demand fails all 3 Fs, Riker categorizes the outburst as pure emotional terrorism. His advice: do not argue, do not justify your decision. Simply disengage, physically leave the room, and walk away laughing at the absurdity of the manipulation attempt.
It's an incredibly powerful tool for maintaining boundaries in the present moment. But Riker also addresses what happens when the damage has already been done.
The book delves into some incredibly advanced trauma reprogramming techniques designed for men who are actively recovering from the devastation of false accusations, parental alienation, or brutal, protracted divorces.
This is where Riker steps out of philosophy and delves deeply into clinical psychology and neuroscience. He is highly critical of traditional talk therapy.
He claims many modern therapists are heavily biased by believe all women ideologies, going so far as to call them trauma arsonists, who will only convince a man he is uniquely flawed.
Instead, he tells men they need to weaponize their own neuroplasticity. He highly recommends a clinical therapy called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. How does EMDR actually work to fix a broken mind?
To understand EMDR, you have to understand how trauma is stored. When a person experiences a highly traumatic event like being falsely arrested in their own home or losing custody of their children, the brain's fear center, the amygdala, can essentially get stuck in an endless trauma loop.
The memory isn't processed properly. It remains raw and visceral, constantly triggering the nervous system's fight or flight response years after the event.
Riker cites studies from Oxford University and the Department of Veterans Affairs showing that EMDR can reduce PTSD symptoms up to 80% faster than traditional talk therapy.
And the mechanism for this is bilateral stimulation, right?
Exactly. A clinician will have the patient vividly recall the traumatic memory while simultaneously inducing rapid eye movements, having the patient track a light moving side to side, or using tactile buzzers alternating in the left and right hands.
This bilateral stimulation forces the left and right hemispheres of the brain to communicate rapidly, effectively breaking the stuck trauma loop in the amygdala and allowing the brain to finally file the memory away as a past event rather than a present threat.
Riker takes this clinical approach and pairs it with what he calls audio hacks that a man can use on his own. He specifically mandates that men listen to 4 Hz theta wave binaural beats during moments of high stress.
The science he cites here is fascinating. Citing research from the Max Planck Institute, Riker explains that listening to audio frequencies tuned to 4 Hz stimulates the brain to produce theta waves.
These specific brain waves are associated with deep meditation and REM sleep. More importantly, theta waves flood the brain with GABA, which is a highly potent, naturally occurring calming neurotransmitter.
He provides a highly practical application for this. He advises men to put on noise-canceling headphones and listen to these 4 hertz binaural beats specifically while reading aggressive, stressful court filings from an ex's lawyer or while drafting emails to a hostile co-parent.
The GABA keeps the amygdala suppressed, preventing the man from firing off an angry, reactive response that could be used against him in court.
He even takes it a step further. Riker has actually produced his own custom audio tracks, where he embeds powerful stoic affirmations and reminders of radical self-ownership beneath the resonant sound of Gregorian chants.
He instructs men to listen to these tracks as they fall asleep, to actively reprogram their subconscious minds against what he calls white knight impulses, the societal conditioning that tells men it is their duty to sacrifice themselves to save a damsel in distress.
It is literal psychological conditioning applied to everyday survival. Which brings us perfectly to the final major concept in the book. Because once your bank accounts are fortified, your body is hardened, and your mind is reprogrammed, you still have to wake up and navigate the real world.
And for most men, that starts with earning a living in what Riker identifies as the gynocratic office.
The modern corporate workplace, according to the worldview presented here, is an absolute minefield for men. Riker pulls data from the Harvard Business Review to dismantle the corporate narrative that men should open up and show vulnerability at work.
The data he cites indicates that male employees who display vulnerability, admit weakness, or share personal struggles are 35% less likely to be promoted or given leadership roles.
He aggressively contrasts this with female colleagues who, he claims based on the data, are frequently rewarded, supported, or accommodated for similar emotional displays.
Riker argues that corporate human resources departments have been entirely captured by ideologies that view masculinity as inherently problematic. He cites a chilling anecdote of a male employee who was formally disciplined and ultimately fired simply because the angle of his webcam during a Zoom call made a female colleague feel uncomfortable, despite zero evidence of inappropriate behavior or language.
So, to survive this hypersensitive environment, he deploys a tactic he calls the Sudoku defense. This sounds almost like a joke when you first read it, but he presents it with absolute seriousness.
He outlines a scenario. You are at your desk trying to work, and a female colleague comes over and attempts to siphon your time and energy with emotional labor, complaining about office drama, venting about her personal life, essentially seeking a free therapist.
Riker says you shouldn't argue or tell her to leave. Instead, you simply pull out a physical Sudoku puzzle book and a pen, and you start filling in the numbered grids while she talks.
The claim he makes regarding the neuroscience behind this is highly specific. He argues that the female hindbrain, when confronted with a man calmly engaging with rigid, mathematical, numbered grids, subconsciously associates the activity with dense, unapproachable tasks like tax forms or coding.
The visual of the grid immediately breaks the emotional connection they were trying to establish, and he claims they will almost immediately grow bored, retreat, and seek emotional validation from a more compliant target.
It's an incredibly dismissive yet highly calculated strategy to protect a man's focus and time.
He also advocates for technological boundaries, mentioning something called the Test-a-Mail plugin. This is a digital tool and an email extension that automatically scans incoming messages for emotionally loaded, time-wasting phrases like, "We need to talk, I feel like," or "just checking in on your bandwidth."
The plugin automatically filters those emails directly into a hidden spam folder, which Riker claims saves a focused man dozens of hours a month from engaging in performative corporate empathy.
It all circles back to his core tenet of preserving male energy, time, and resources at all costs. But outside the controlled environment of the office, in the unpredictable world of modern dating, Riker is even more ruthless.
He outlines a comprehensive four-phase shield for vetting women. He believes most men stumble into relationships blindly, ultimately walking themselves straight into the family court traps we discussed earlier.
The vetting process he details is basically a counterintelligence operation. Phase 1. Meticulously observe her relationship with her own father. If she openly badmouths the man who raised her, complains about his shortcomings, while simultaneously continuing to take his money or resources, Riker says that is a massive red flag.
He argues she will eventually treat you with the exact same entitled contempt. Run.
Phase 2. Audit her social circle. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. If her closest friends are all bitter, divorce-happy girl bosses who constantly complain about men, Riker says she already has a jury selected and rigged to convict you the moment things get difficult.
Phase 3 is critical. It's about testing her psychological response to male boundaries. Riker instructs men to calmly tell the woman they are dating to go out and enjoy a girls' night without him.
If she returns and gets angry or tries to pick a fight specifically because the man isn't acting jealous or controlling, Riker states she thrives on emotional chaos and drama. She views peace as boring.
And finally, Phase 4, the financial stress test.
This one is brutal, but effective. 6 months into a serious relationship, Riker advises a man to lie and pretend he has suffered a massive financial setback, like losing his job or a major investment. He says to watch her reaction with clinical detachment.
If she immediately starts trying to help him budget, supports his next move, and stands by him, she has potential.
But if her eyes glaze over and she immediately starts calculating an exit strategy because the resource tap has been turned off, cut her loose immediately.
If we connect all these granular tactics, the vetting, the offshore accounts, the emotional detachment to the bigger picture Riker is painting, he is ultimately advocating for a complete systematic withdrawal from societal systems he views as predatory.
And that leads to the final macro-level solutions proposed in the book, the building of a counterculture and actual parallel societies.
He believes the mainstream system cannot be reformed from within. It can only be abandoned. He points to real-world examples of men already doing this.
He highlights the Free State Project in New Hampshire, where thousands of libertarian-minded individuals physically relocated to a single state to consolidate voting power, take over local school boards, and begin building a localized society heavily focused on radical personal liberty, gun rights, and massive deregulation.
He also highlights the incredible growth of the men's shed movement, which originated in Australia but is spreading globally. The book notes there are over 2,300 of these workshops operating right now.
These are physical spaces where older, retired tradesmen gather to teach younger, directionless men hard skills like plumbing, advanced carpentry, and electrical work.
Crucially, they do this entirely outside the purview of feminized university systems or state licensing bureaucracies. It's men passing down vital knowledge directly to other men.
And in the urban centers, like Detroit, he talks about the rise of underground manufacturing co-ops. These are networks of former union auto workers and machinists who repair heavy machinery, weld, and build infrastructure strictly for untraceable cash or barter.
They are actively creating a localized, parallel economy that the state cannot tax, regulate, or extract from.
But to participate in these parallel societies safely and effectively, Riker insists that men must adopt absolute, militant digital privacy. He dedicates a significant portion of the final chapter to what he calls digital ghosting.
He warns his readers that carrying a mainstream smartphone is like carrying a tracked device voluntarily. He notes a specific data point. Apple handed over user data to government agencies over 12,000 times in a single year.
His solution: burner phones. He points out that Vladimir Putin famously refuses to use an iPhone due to security risks, and Riker tells his readers they should adopt the same level of paranoia.
He advocates buying cheap Android burner phones with physical cache, activating them only on public Wi-Fi networks far from your home, and keeping them wrapped in RFID-blocking tinfoil pouches when not in active use so they cannot be pinged by cell towers.
On the software side, the protocols are just as strict. He pushes for the exclusive use of the Tor browser to route internet traffic through multiple encrypted layers, masking the user's IP address.
He mandates the use of Proton VPN, specifically because they are based in Switzerland and operate under a strict, legally tested no-logs policy, meaning even if they are subpoenaed, they have no user data to hand over.
And for communication, he insists on Signal, as it utilizes end-to-end encryption and stores zero metadata regarding who you are talking to or when.
And my absolute favorite part of the tech breakdown in this book is his explanation of steganography. It sounds like something out of a Cold War spy novel, but he applies it to modern financial survival. Let's break down how this actually works for the listener.
Steganography is the practice of hiding secret, encrypted data within an ordinary, completely non-secret file. Unlike cryptography, which scrambles a message so it's unreadable, steganography hides the very existence of the message.
Riker explains how a man can use free, open-source software like OpenStego to embed his complex offshore financial blueprints, or the seed phrases to his multi-sig crypto vaults, directly inside the binary code of a mundane JPEG image.
So you could take a picture of a sunset, or a stupid meme of a cat, and hide your multi-million-dollar Belize banking details inside it.
Exactly. To anyone looking at the file, even a forensic accountant combing through your hard drive during a divorce discovery phase, it just looks like a low-resolution picture of a cat.
You can then post that image to a public, seemingly abandoned Flickr account, The data is hidden in plain sight.
Only the person who possesses the specific decryption key and the steganography software can extract the hidden text from the image file. It is literal spycraft applied to everyday survival in what Riker views as a deeply hostile state apparatus.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today, and we are coming to the end of this incredible deep dive. To summarize the massive scope of this work, Conrad Riker's Redpilled Serenity Prayer is a ruthless, unapologetic, and highly systematic survival manual.
It is written specifically for men who are actively navigating a legal and cultural system they believe is inherently rigged against their survival.
Riker seamlessly blends highly complex offshore financial tactics, hardcore physical and psychological stoicism, and evolutionary biology to teach men how to become completely, undeniably untouchable, legally, financially, and emotionally.
And as we wrap up this extensive analysis, I want to once again remind you, the listener, of our initial premise. We have maintained strict neutrality and impartiality throughout this discussion.
We have unpacked these explosive, highly charged political concepts and detail the author's tactical frameworks to give you a clear, detailed window into the men's rights activist and red-pilled worldview.
We have done this entirely without adopting or endorsing the author's specific positions, but rather to analyze the text and the mechanics of the philosophy you are interested in understanding.
Absolutely. We are just the impartial messengers breaking down the source material. But if this deep dive and this breakdown of Riker's complex mechanics resonated with you, I highly encourage you to go directly to the source, buy the ebook, and read these fascinating strategies in full detail for yourself.
Check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books right now to secure your copy.
Also, be sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack for more of his ongoing analysis and content. And finally, please hit that like button and subscribe to the deep dive to support the show and ensure we can keep these long-form, unvarnished analyses coming to you.
I will leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over as you process everything we've discussed today. Riker strongly advocates for capable, high-earning men to completely withdraw their resources and labor from mainstream societal and legal structures, moving into these parallel societies and decentralized financial fortresses.
But consider the macroeconomic implications of this strategy.
If the builders, the engineers, the physical laborers, and the primary tax providers of society successfully ghost the system en masse, taking their capital, their labor, and their innovations into the shadows with them, what happens to the massive infrastructure of the mainstream world left behind?
Does this system eventually collapse under its own bureaucratic weight, as Riker predicts?
Or will that system, desperate for resources to maintain itself, find unexpected, potentially far more aggressive and authoritarian ways to adapt, track, and extract resources from those attempting to flee?
An incredibly chilling thought to end on, and a question that will likely define the next decade of these cultural dynamics. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.